Good morning. Thank you all for joining us for the Thursday breakfast session. Hope you've got breakfast, coffee, and extra water to have a really great final close to the event. All right, we always look the most forward to any conversation about revenue because it drives whether we stay in business or not. So it's kind of an important conversation. And I have a great panel with me up here this morning to talk about new developments and different ways to look at revenue in your industry. So I'm just going to go down the line here and have you all just give about a minute or so introduction of who you are, what you do, and the perspective you're bringing to the table.
Sure. So Mike Levison, my company's called Metro Venture Properties. We're based out of Denver, Colorado. And I think we were throwing out a lot of terms. I think talking at some of the tables yesterday, I'm probably somewhere between a developer, an operator, a syndicator. I'll say I'm a deal guy, and that's what our company does. So probably spending the most of our time and effort on, ground up new development and construction, but we also acquire existing properties, rehab, reposition. Working on a couple projects right now that I think we're going to talk through, but one in particular being, I call it rental townhomes. I think the industry shifted us to BFR, BTR, whatever these terms are, but basically creating single family attached rental properties in low amenitized communities. So we're trying to put all of our money and all of the wow factor, within the perimeter of the units, and thus, the interest on, tech. I would say right now what's keeping me up at night, though, is equity is not stretching as far as our project performance initially thought. Debt is harder. So, to me, a lot of this, yes, revenue, it's things I think that we can count on from some of these investments, but it's also tenant, retention. It's about trying to make sure that if we have performer rents and we have performer renewal rates and vacancy rates and all this good jazz that's out there committing to our banks, that we're going to be able to deliver on it as quick as we can. Those of you guys in the seats that have to deal with the money side of things, a lot of banks and debt funds and other things enacting covenants out there. And so, performing on your properties the way you expected is very important. It was easy in the past to develop things. You took it out of the ground, you made a lot of money and you moved on. Not so much anymore. So I think this topic is about revenue. It's about tenant engagement. It's about really just performing on the projects that we're getting out of the ground.
That's exciting. That really is. I'm looking forward to digging into some of that. So, of course, I'm Taylor Whitaker. I'm the founder and CEO of PropTech IQ. We are a third-party validation provider for property technology. We grab implementation data from live, actual working implementations, because we know there's so many vendors out there that like to say they have so many units deployed. And then when you say, hey, can you give us some data on that? They're like, no. So needless to say, we work with the vendors that actually can share with us their implementation data, as well as, of course, our market data sources through companies like Dwellsy IQ. So we have roughly half of the market as it relates to live and historical market data that dates back to 2016. And we've been working on a product for the past 5 years to help you guys better articulate the value prop that technology can provide, not just from a cash-on-cash perspective, but from the efficiencies. So we'll talk about some of that more today with your specific project. That's my spiel.
Thanks, Taylor.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. I'm Zach Schmitz. I am the co-founder of Public Grid. And what I can provide this morning for you all is an implementation or a perspective on what it looks like to have a technology implementation at a software layer to provide opportunities for revenue generation back to residents. And so what we do at Public Grid is we operate as an energy management platform for residents. So we maintain the energy account information and do all the billing for residents as it pertains to electricity and natural gas when it is on the resident to sign up with the local utility company. So if the resident, this isn't in sub-meter properties right now, but if the resident has to sign up with their local utility company, we manage that so that way it's operationally efficient for your property staff, but then it also becomes a way to generate revenue back to the properties. And so from that perspective, I'm super excited to talk to a little bit more about what we do, but just from a broad perspective on how software can help things like resident engagement, provide opportunities for ways to create more revenue streams for properties, but also be operationally efficient.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much. Okay, so we're going to have a little bit of fun as we start because I was curious and I was going to ask all of you. The big question is, which technology is driving revenue? And then I was thinking, well, what was the first technology you tried to engage with in the industry for revenue, and how did it go? The good, the bad, the ugly, the great. We'll start with you, Mike.
Oh boy. Well, very new, I guess we'll say, on the front of trying to implement technology to drive revenue. But I can tell you, probably not the most glorious story, but the first project where we actually got really crazy with cameras and surveillance on a property didn't necessarily go so well. I think we just started picking out places with our low voltage contractor and pointing and shooting and cameras everywhere, and we had these great apps and these wonderful things that we thought we'd be able to manage our property. And as it turned out, the tenants hated it. It was an invasion of privacy because we just did not do a good job of putting a dome camera right under somebody's door. They really didn't appreciate that, as I wouldn't either. We just didn't think about it at the time. But I can tell you, one of the good things that we just didn't think about, we thought it was a safety thing. Well, as it turns out, you could have a high definition video of somebody breaking into a car and go to the police with it, and they say, go to the website and fill out a form. We don't care, right? So we didn't get a lot of value there, but we did see some operational things. A good example, in Colorado, you have snow removal. Snow removal companies come out. They will charge typically, if you don't have them on a set contract, which you don't, they'll charge, a fixed dollar for every time they come, right? If a snowstorm comes, every X number of inches of snow will come once, per period. And, we caught a couple of our snow companies out there, 5 or 6 times in a day on a 3 or 4 inch snowstorm. And we were getting thousands of dollars of bills. And lo and behold, we had some footage, right? We had things we could go back and talk. So, maybe low on the tech side, but it was our kind of first dipping into putting things in properties we hadn't before.
Sounds to be like a good learning opportunity.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Find good partners.
Invasion of privacy was not our goal, but that was what ended up happening.
I'm telling you, man. It's similar. So I started at Alliance back in 2018. And my experience with technology for the first time was it was smart home. And it was through a vendor called Dwello, which has been acquired by Level. But at the time, they had not deployed technology at scale, really. We were one of the pilots, right? Like, we were the ones trying to help them figure it out. And I remember I flew up Salt Lake City. I met the Dwello guys for the first time, went to their demo, and they were like, oh, yeah, you got to check this out. You should hang out, stay a couple days. That's totally cool. We ended up camping in the hallways because batteries were dying on the locks at the time. Like, they didn't have that figured out yet, the Z-Wave battery drain issue. So my first experience with IoT, as it was my first experience period in multifamily, was a very negative one. It was really like how inconvenient the technology could be if it was not a seamless experience. And it really kind of put a big focus on how could we do this better. And that actually started our audit with Alliance and the pilots and all the things. So it was that negative experience that we learned from that really put Alliance on the path to implement the technology at scale. So good time.
I mean, mine specifically is with utility companies. I think if you have a utility company, you probably don't think they're your favorite company in the world. If you look at the Yelp reviews on them, they're not someplace that you would go out and eat lunch at. So typically from the utility perspective, their focus is on delivering the service, whether it's electrons, whether it's gas. It's not really focused on customer service. And so from our perspective, or at least from my perspective, I was trying to sign up with electricity and I was moving in. And it was one of those things where it became so daunting and so hard, having to call the utility company, cycling through the list of menu twice just to get to the menu option that says call, do you want to speak to a live person, only to be told that everything that I had needed to sign up for my electricity account couldn't be done in the time that I needed it to. And so for me, that experience itself was so painful. And so when we started looking at what we were doing at Public Grid, we realized it's ubiquitous. Like, I don't know if there's a lot of people, like I said, that love their utility company. And so the age-old thing there is that utility industry is not great. It's not a sexy industry. It's not something that people really want to focus on. But it doesn't mean that it has to be a bad experience, specifically for residents. And so I think for me, when it comes to thinking through experiences, how things could be done better, it doesn't have to always be the most complicated solution. It doesn't have to be the most confusing solution in the world to make things better for residents, but also make them opportunities for improvement for people's lives. So I think utility companies is something that have been ingrained in the infrastructure of America for so long that we think they are just status quo, but they really don't have to be.
Thank you for sharing all those. I will say the one thing with technology and revenue is it's going to change your customer experience to some degree, and that needs to be accounted for in a decision beyond the bottom line, because you would never stay at an apartment where you couldn't get in and had to sleep on the floor when the locks didn't work. So thank you for those. Okay, so this industry is like glacially slow, as you're talking about with utilities, and also incredibly at lightning speed fast at the same time. So currently, what's the biggest change you've observed that's opening up more potential for revenue opportunities with tech? I'll start with you. What's had you start looking in those directions, Mike?
I think spoke a lot about it in the last couple of days, but I think the pandemic obviously I think changed a lot of people and how they view the places that they live. I think it wasn't that long ago where it was, I want a studio apartment and I want to be in an urban setting because I've got light rail or I've got amenities all around in the neighborhood, and that's what I'm looking for, right? And I think as everybody stays home and had to work from home, all of a sudden, in-unit features like workspaces and things like that became, I think, a much more attractive amenity. And so we're kind of taking the stance that, I said it earlier, within the four walls, the perimeter of the units themselves, the more that we can add that connects our tenants to those units, I think the better that we're going to do. And so obviously being able to account for revenue and figure out exactly what that bottom line impact means. But I think, that shift in the fact that people are becoming more and more connected with technology, more and more connected with their office and workspace from their living room or from their bedroom means that, investing in this is not just, a potential added opportunity. It's a way to actually retain and keep our tenants and really separate ourselves. Or maybe just a prerequisite, frankly, if we're all doing it, but it's needed.
Most definitely. I really think that what's interesting and driving the most revenue that I've observed since 2018 is that when I got involved and technology was still super, again, IoT was very much in its early phase. Managed Wi-Fi had kind of started the conversation, but really it wasn't there yet. We've seen kind of the shift where owners have primarily monetized the square footage of their multifamily communities to, they're looking, if you look at a single family home and you look at what does that household spend money on? Internet, electricity, Like what are just the utilities to function, right? I think what we're seeing is that multifamily communities are recognizing that they can monetize and tap into all of these things to support households, not just, the square footage. And so how can we make it a fantastic experience within the four walls? How can we make it a fantastic experience for the utility? Like every single component, there is an opportunity to generate revenue. And so companies like, not to name drop, but Amenify, for instance, they came in and they were like, hey, you don't want to have to, coordinate house cleaners and dog walkers and services to come to the unit, but we can do that for you. And now we can give you another revenue stream to tap into. So the owner has slowly been given the opportunity to tap into all these additional revenue streams, turning their multifamily communities from just, again, that square footage monetization to let's monetize off every single dollar that resident spends to live comfortably. I want a piece of it. And so I think that's just at its core what is happening. And I think that's the technology has enabled us to do that more effectively. But I think we're going to continue to see that shift. And I think over the next few years, we're going to see the monetization per square footage actually be less than how much they can tap into from being an ISP, being a utility provider, being grocery delivery, being dog walking services. Literally, there is so much that people spend money on. Rent is just typically between 20 to 50%. So how do we tap into that other 50%? And I think that's the biggest trend we've observed.
And you see the technologies there to make that happen.
Absolutely.
But the data is what's going to drive it too. I think going back to equity packages and loan packages and really trying to value these properties, we have to be able to take the data and relate it back to these performance, because right now the industry is not doing it. Right?
That's exactly right.
Appraisals are not coming back with additional revenue streams. As a matter of fact, it's almost looked at as fluff, right? It's one step beyond late fees and things like that. It just does not go into the financial analysis of properties. And so I think you can get that data and you can really show it. It's going to enable, companies like all of us, right, to invest heavier into the product, right, to make them better. Because right now it's good, bad, or different. It can still kind of just be put it in there and It's just like choosing your tile and anything else in a project as far as looking at the financial impact on the front end.
I think that, we've all been overpromised and underdelivered on. I think we're a little, I hate to say PTSD, but I think we all have PTSD to an extent in this industry because we've all made bets, we've taken chances, and sometimes those chances don't work out. And while that's very important and necessary for innovation, I do think that, being the most glacially slow, I love that. I'm going to use that. So the glacially slow, there is no, what's the catalyst to get an owner to want to implement technology? If they're already making money and it's tried and true and they don't have any technology, why would they risk more money for the chance of potentially making more money? It doesn't make sense. So the owners are like, yeah, if you can show us. And it goes back to my career at Alliance. When I was able to show Jay Hemans, the president of Alliance, the data that IoT could provide value. When I asked him for 10,000 units for a partnership with Google, he said, let's do 25,000 units because the data was that good and he was that confident that he went all in. But there has not been that data stream. And really, from my perspective, that's been the single biggest challenge for any owner to adopt a technology is it still is a gamble unless they invest their own time, energy, effort, and resources to determine the real value.
Yep. And
that's not in the cards for everybody. So with equity being as tricky as it is and money being more expensive and bridge debt being outrageous, it's a really, really rough time. So I think if we can help you guys better navigate what the value of the tech actually is, again, everybody wins as the whole industry moves forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's interesting there too. Two things that you said. One, I think you're 100% right. I think residents are spending money in other places and, they're going to spend money on their utilities. They're going to spend money on a dog walking service. They're going to spend money on things. And instead of framing them as advertisements or thinking through like, you go use Rover, go use any of these other products out there, use this specific Wi-Fi service or whatever. If you just streamline it and you meet them at the moment of when they need those things, I think it doesn't become an advertisement, it becomes an opportunity and really creating that unique experience for them to say, okay, well, I have to sign up for an internet service anyways. And if my apartment building is doing it for me, it's a better experience, but it also generates that revenue back, right? So creating those opportunities within the walls and outside the walls to bring the resident in the fold is a big one. And I think the other interesting thing is specifically, I think you got to find win-win-win solutions. And when I say win-win-win, I think of what are the solutions out there that aren't going to cost the resident more money, aren't going to cost the operator money, or that can be done. And then for the implementer or whoever's out there, they get a cut of whatever that is too, right? So is it a company that comes in there and says, we're going to give you these things for free, and we're going to basically take the risk on ourselves? The resident's not going to see an impact in terms of anything negative, more cost experience wise, and then what we do by the implementation side of it is going to actually create revenue for the business to be sustainable. And so I think right now, nobody wants to go spend an extra dollar. But if you as a company or even as an operator find those solutions that are those win-win-wins, I think it really will create a barrier of entry, reduce the barrier of entry on a lot of the really exciting things in the tech world that aren't really accessible when you just think about them at face value.
I agree. Well said. Very well said.
Thank you all for that. So when you all, again, have very different perspectives on how to analyze something that is a potential revenue opportunity and then decide how to make a decision on that, I want to start with you, Mike. Mm-hmm. You obviously are getting into this conversation about tech for revenue. Can you talk us through what specifically has your attention the most, or what you're seeing is the most innovative use of tech for revenue that you're interested in?
Yeah, it's funny. The answer to that question would have been very different probably 48 hours ago. Did anybody go on the tour last night of the Connect building? Just the whole concept of basically in-house WeWork, I thought was just makes a ton of sense. So, I think talking about some of these revenue streams, my horizons are being expanded here. Going into this, I was really thinking more along the lines of, manage Wi-Fi. Obviously, if we can get somebody, we put the infrastructure in up front into the properties, get the fiber pulled, and, we can sign a contract for what a 12, 14, 16 bucks, whatever they're charging per unit per month. And we can pass along, kind of what those market prices are. If somebody's going to Comcast or Cox or whatever it is for $50, right? And we can provide Wi-Fi to them for $40. That is a win-win-win, right? Call it shared savings, whatever we want to tub it as. the rest of the stuff, like the in-home IoT that I think we kind of talked about, I don't know how to monetize that. I think it's all up to me about, retention. It's about that tenant experience. And so that's where we were heading. But I got to tell you, I think a lot of the stuff that I've seen and some of the conversations I've had here in the last day and a half are really changing my perspective on revenue streams. So.
Very, very well said. I'll tell you, I didn't get to go to this Connect, but I did go to the one in Phoenix, and I was incredibly impressed. Really, they're just an incredible team over there, Takara Partners. They're doing really innovative things. So glad to hear it went well, really.
The memberships, right? I mean, having a membership to your, to your shared office space, and it's a great idea.
It was literally, I walked up this morning, and Matt from the panel yesterday, not to totally call him out, because I know he's chatting over there. Hey, buddy. He walked up and was like, yeah, I can't believe I missed that tour last night. And I was like, I know, right? And we just got off on a pretty quick conversation about how incredible that was. But that's a prime example. They sell, memberships to non-tenants to come work out of their WeWork. So it's a whole new revenue stream. You don't even have to have people living there. I mean, that's huge, right? But as it relates to most innovative things I've seen in the revenue space, it really is around things like, I'd say services that take pre-existing pain points like deposits. Like, I know it's very simple. Hey, let's eliminate your deposit, and instead of you giving us $500 or $1,000 up front, you're just going to pay us $20 a month. It may not seem like a drastic improvement, but given that I think the statistic is like 80% of Americans, if you ask them to come up with $1,000, they could not do it. Services like deposit elimination are coming in. They're helping not only owners recover bad debt associated with negative residents, right? Any sort of damage or something like that, but it also helps the resident. Kind of goes back to that win-win-win. You know what I mean? How can we find things that take really painful pre-existing things that have to be done every single day, and how can we create opportunity? And I know owners are making like $3 to $4 clear and free on top per unit per month from deploying something like that, whereas their deposit money, previously they'd say, hey, give us that money, and now I'm responsible to manage that money, and I'm responsible to pay that money back to the resident at some point. And what if we sell the asset? What if management changes? All these things. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from residents that have lived in a community that shifted hands, and then they moved out. They never got their deposit back because the people that they signed their lease with took it. That's unacceptable. That is absolutely unacceptable. So I think services like Lease Lock that can come in, or similar services, and provide value without actually disrupting and generating revenue, I think those are the keywords, man.
Yeah, I mean, the pain point, I think, is the biggest one. Finding the pain points in the process, wherever it might be, and picking a solution that fills that gap. Not only will it help with your resident turnover experience and all the other good metrics that it tracks, but it's a pain point for a reason, which means there's an opportunity to monetize it.
Absolutely.
And so I think when you see something that's the way that things have been, or the way that things have been done, and it's just, for instance, deposits were just status quo. I had to move into a place, I had to front some money. And now they're changing the landscape of, again, it's revenue generating, but it's a better experience for the resident. And so focusing on those like pain points along the journey are really interesting opportunities to convert what traditionally might not have been an opportunity for revenue into a revenue and a better experience, which helps with non-tangible factors as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can you continue on then and talk through how the technology has changed to allow for taking something that is a massive pain point tied with cable, with the utilities, and moving that into a revenue generating stream for the operators?
Yeah, I mean, and just a little bit of self-advertisement up here. I mean, what we do at Public Grid is we effectively manage that utility account. And so for us, we know that resident has to pay that bill anyways. And there's so many cool things you can do in the electric industry right now with decarbonization, with ESG related goals, with net zero targets. And so local utility companies really want that interface with the residents to be able to create better ways for them on the demand side to reduce demand, to create less investment need for the transmission lines. And so from that perspective, they really want to get residents to use less energy. And what that looks like is demand response projects with like smart thermostats. And so one of the things that we do is we help enable, not only is it just a smart thermostat installation And then instead of the property having to front that cost, it's an opportunity or a vehicle to recoup some of that cost. As a platform, we save the resident money by implementing a smart thermostat, and we get a small management fee, and then we in turn give that back to the property. And so resident saves money, we make a little bit of money, as well as the property makes money. And so it becomes that win-win-win scenario. And with electricity specifically, there are a ton of really awesome opportunities, and they're all geographically segmented. But one of the things we do is all residents on our platform get 100% renewable energy for no extra cost, which lowers your ESG-related emissions, your Scope 3 related resident emissions. It helps with things like LEED certification and other like little pain points along the way there. And so with the opportunity to take something that is so archaic and then think about the structures within that bounds to create opportunity is really exciting. And I think that's the same thing with anything that is status quo. And so we took the structure of an electricity account and said, you know, the IRA has $4.5 billion of home electrification assistance coming through the pipeline. There are residents asking for renewable energy. There are utility companies wanting residents to reduce the energy. And the thing that's missing there is a platform to be able to facilitate all that. And so everyone wins in this scenario, and it creates an opportunity to get revenue back along that line of a pain point.
But, and I might add, and I know we probably need to get on to the next one, but in a couple of markets we're in, okay, specifically the city and county of Denver, you know, they have recently enacted some legislation like Energize Denver and Denver Green Build. And more or less, you have a property that is within the city limits of Denver, you are going to have annual submissions that you need to make. And if you're, you know, property-wide EUI, and I'm going to screw these up, you can probably help me with the right terms. But if your property-wide EUI does not get down to a 39, you know, come 2027, there's actually monetary fines that you have to pay back to the city. So it's not just, hey, can we save energy? There's actually punitive that is going to come back to us as the operator and the building owner, not to the tenant.
Yep.
Right. And so, you know, as we're designing a few of our projects right now, we have some of our consultants that, you know, are kind of queuing us in, right? Okay, maybe this is the energy code you just need to meet to get out of the ground. But if you don't take this additional step, you know, come 2027, you're going to have punitive fines that are coming in, right? Which is, you know, imagine what that does to your performance, right? And to your operating budgets.
Yeah, local law 97 in New York City, DC, I'm going to butcher the names, but it's Bardo in Boston and Burdo in DC. And maybe I'm flipping those. But these are local legislations that are requiring reduction in usage and focusing on Scope 3 tenant level emissions, which if you can't get your tenants to reduce, then the fines go to the property. They don't go to the tenant.
Exactly right.
Which is a really interesting.
It really incentivizes us to invest in this technology.
Exactly. I think it's, and if you know, installing a smart thermostat's 20% reduction in energy. And that's a really easy thing to do, especially when the local utility company will front the cost of it.
So I think we just found a win, 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 because the fourth win is a pain point that's coming down the pipeline of legislation that certain technologies can help you prepare for and deal with, which is great. Okay, so when you're considering new technologies for revenue, the thing is always the numbers. And we thought something that would be interesting this morning is to actually go through some of the numbers on Mike's project, because he's new to this. He's new to incorporating the technology, looking at it from its revenue perspective and run it through Taylor's system and see what the numbers show and just kind of work through that. So it's taking the next step of like, if you're considering something for revenue, what are the questions you're asking and the numbers you're hoping to see?
In your Metro Ventures, right?
Yeah. So this project, like I said, we're trying to get it out of the ground here in the next couple of weeks and trying to close our loan packages. And so it's front of mind. It may not be that representative, but it's 38 single family attached townhomes. So they're 3-bed, 3-bath. It's in kind of I'll call it a suburban infill setting. So we have garages. And we're really trying to make the experience, you know, look and feel very much like somebody who wants to be in a, you know, suburban single family setting. And so
Perfect.
A lot of the technology that we're thinking of, right, has to do with stuff that, frankly, I think is kind of cool. I have in my house. And so I think to myself, okay, if I was living here, what would I want? So yeah, it's smart thermostats. It's connected door locks. It is doorbells. It is the garage. So that, you know, someone can still do the, you know, the Amazon delivery, you know, directly to their house, and these types of functions. All this in addition to hosted Wi-Fi, right?
Absolutely. So help me understand, because I know just via my own experience, 80918 is Colorado Springs. What do you know the zip code where this one's located? Because we do look at market specific data.
I could find it. Let's go 80214. That's probably wrong. But
214. That's cool. So essentially here what we're doing is we're putting in some basic details. So in this case, because this is a test case, we don't need to have the community name specifically because we're not actually looking. This is a new development, so there's nothing to look at, right? It's being developed right now. So 80214, 38 units. This is a new development that's going to be under lease up, of course. It's Class A because it's brand new, and it would be considered a walk-up because, again, you guys are really doing that. And then at the very end, of course, I'm going to select myself. So you mentioned that you guys are doing smart home IoT and managed Wi-Fi, right?
That's the goal walking into yesterday. So maybe more. We'll see.
Now, obviously, there are many other things, and of course, as you guys can see,
You want to add one on?
I'm totally down. You want to throw something else on there?
Give me an idea. Throw it in.
All right, let's throw self-guided tours in there.
Absolutely.
That's a good one.
100%.
So essentially, we've got smart home, we've got managed Wi-Fi, and self-guided tours. Now, independently, one of these technologies may not bring certain revenue drivers, but combined, again, you're going to see as a suite, it's a pretty impactful solution. So smart home wise, do you have pricing, or do you want me to kind of run through just kind of high level?
Go for it.
Okay. So we'd say kind of on average, smart home wise, for the hardware you kind of outlined, we're looking at about $1,200 or so on the high end. Low end, you're looking at about $1,000 a unit. So we'll put $1,150. I'll go ahead and throw $8 per unit per month in there and a 72 month. So smart home, right off the bat, you're going to put in whatever it is that the vendor is quoting. Managed Wi-Fi, same thing, right? Different scope because typically you're going to pay a significant capital expense on the front end, but it'll be for the whole community. So what do you have any idea what your average CapEx is for?
I think for this project, a dollar per door, it's going to look huge. I think it's over $100,000 just because we have multiple buildings.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, let's go ahead and put 115K. Just, why not? And then as it relates to the fee from the ISP, we'll figure like $1,875 a month, or do you pay? Okay. So this is where, again, we're establishing those costs. And then self-guided tours, typically that's just a feature that is an additional value from IoT. So we're just going to zero that out because there's no cost associated, but we will see the efficiency benefits and the conversion benefits here in a second. So all in all, after we kind of have selected our technology, we've input the actual expenses associated. We're, of course, breaking that down per unit to perform the analysis. But we do want to know what hardware, because in some circumstances, technologies do impact operationally and some of them don't, right? So if it's software only, it may not have an actual impact operationally. But if it's hardware, like a smart lock, and we know we're underwriting right now to ensure that every move out and every unit turn, that smart lock gets rekeyed. Whether it's replacing it with a previous tumbler that we have setting aside so there's no parts expenditures, or whether it be replacing it altogether, there is still the time associated for the maintenance person to perform the task. Right. So by selecting certain pieces of hardware, again, we're looking at those underwritten labor determined expenditures, as well as we're looking at individual labor markets in unique micro markets, right? So in this case, we're looking in Colorado at what's the cost for labor for maintenance, what's the cost for leasing staff. Based on the size that you've got, 38 units, it also knows that you're not going to have tons of staff members, right? So if it was a 500 unit community, it would compensate because it knows you're going to have on average one leasing and one maintenance staff person per 100 units, right? So again, hardware is super important, but in this case, you said we had a garage door opener, we had smart locks, smart thermostats, the hub, leak detection sensor. Did you guys have any door sensors?
No. I was like, I don't know what that is. So
no worries. And then we've got a sample managed Wi-Fi solution here where we've got 2 lines coming in from the ISP. We've got 12 indoor access points, 6 switches, 4 outdoor access points, and then of course fiber and Cat7. So if we hit continue here, to the very last page before we run our report, this is actually telling us in real time, based on the scope we just entered, what we would have to charge per unit per month if we wanted to break even by the end of the periods that are established. So if your goal was like, hey, we want to sell this in 3 years and we want to make sure we hit where we need, you would have to charge $150 per unit per month as those are leasing up in order for you to hit those goals. But in this case, because we discussed a little bit previously, we wanted to, with IoT and Wi-Fi, figure about $75 a month. And you want to see what that looks like. So we're going to go ahead and just generate the report here. It is a 3-page report that's automatically generated, just kind of sifting through here. But running through it, we can see in the first page, we are really just met with the scope of the property we just went over, right? 38 units, but we're also pulling in that zip code. What's the cap rate? It's 5.19% in that market. It's 5.8% vacancy rate in that market. So we're seeing a lot of the market data right off the bat, and we're seeing a summary of, once again, what the scope is we're looking at. But the second page, this is where we're looking at the cash on cash return. So this is only looking at what you're charging in additional revenue and what your expenses are from a 3, 5, 7, and 10-year perspective on your valuation, annual NOI, and ROI, including, of course, IRR at the top. Now, these numbers on the second page are what is most familiar with most owner-operators because they know what they're spending and they know what they're charging. However, what they don't know is what we have on our third page, and this is really our value proposition, where we're looking at the intangibles such as prospect conversion impact, operational efficiency impact, resident retention, and vacant units specifically. And so breaking that down, we can see that annually, this specific tech package that we've outlined would impact these 38 units at a roughly offset of $21,000 a year. And that's primarily due to the fact that you're going to have a 22.18% increase in resident retention. You're going to have a decrease in days on market to lease up a unit because obviously your conversion is going to improve significantly, and you're going to save roughly 25.79 hours on a monthly basis from a staff perspective. And so if we take the cash on cash $75 and we pair that with these efficiencies, the bottom left corner of these numbers, and I know I'm going to kind of zoom in here so you guys can see it a little bit better. This is an actual representation of what this project could do for the property. So it's actually looking, once again, not just at your increase in revenue, but also how are you saving those, pre-existing buckets of money that you've already underwritten. So obviously we also want to show you if you just let the efficiencies pay for themselves and did not increase rent, we do show that as well, 5, 7, and 10-year impacts. But really, this very specific bit of information, an owner would previously have to run a 6 to 9 month pilot across 5,000 units or more to actually be able to determine efficiency-related impact.
Well, and what I can tell you too is based on the strategy of all of your firms, right? Depending on how you guys look at liquidity events and pulling capital out of projects, I can tell you the way we look at that is the money going in is going to be CapEx, right? The operational efficiencies and the revenues coming out is going to go right into our analysis, when we're talking to the agencies, right? And we're trying to put long-term debt in. And so we're going to ride that leverage curve up as much as we can. And if the money, goes in for a couple $100,000, but it's coming out in the tune of $25,000 or $30,000 of additional NOI, multiply it by 20, right? I mean, it really does start to look like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's where, so if we kind of break down the efficiencies, because I know you guys all probably are wondering, wow, what goes into these numbers?
Sure.
These are some of the things specifically. So on the actual electricity cost side, we talked about this a little bit earlier. So vacant units typically are the only electricity costs that owners are paying. So we do know what the savings are of smart technology. Like you mentioned, 20%. It's close, right?
Yeah.
So essentially, being able for the owner to see how this is going to impact their vacant unit spend because they have those pre-existing costs regardless, also very, very helpful. And it really, really helps articulate the value of the energy side of things too. So anyways, I won't go off on a super tangent again. If you guys want to know more information, happy to answer more questions. But
I think it's a tool too. Like I said, where it's going in my mind, it's a tool to bring to the appraisals, right? No matter how you operate a building, no matter how you plan to operate a building, it almost doesn't matter, right? It's industry metrics. It's usually numbers that are pulled out based on something that really has nothing to do with the way you designed or the way you're actually going to build a property. And so having that data, because we battle this a lot, right? Having that data say, no, my management expense is not going to be this, it's going to be this. Well, why? Because our properties typically go less. Well, great. The industry doesn't hit there, right? So to be able to take data like this and say, okay, actual implementation of a capital improvement, if you want to call it that, even though we're talking construction, here's what we're actually going to see based on real data out there. I think that's huge. So
I appreciate that. I really think the one thing I would articulate is if he was just looking at the cash on cash like most owners do, we'll just generate the report again. Who cares?
Let's do it live.
Yeah, we just do it live. We do it live. So if it was just cash on cash, chances are, I can tell you, if I was the decision maker, I would not move forward with this project. But knowing, just because obviously 7 years will -% return, I'm gonna have to wait 10 years to see 1%. No, thank you. But when we look into the actual impact and you see, oh wow, actually 10 years, I'm gonna have a 9% return. That's a little bit easier to stomach. By year 5, I'm actually gonna have a 4% return. It's a pretty big jump. You know what I mean?
If you're not doing a cap rate analysis, whatever roles everybody's in within the organizations, if you're not speaking in terms of property enhancement through cap rate analysis on investments like this, you're not doing yourself justice. Because yes, decisions get made on a cash return, but I can tell you, we're looking at the balance sheet.
That's exactly right.
And there's probably not a lot of people in most organizations that are staring at the balance sheet, especially in the operations side, but you'll get it sold. I think you'll get it sold that way.
I agree, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, I think from my perspective, a tool like this, I think everyone in the multifamily industry loves to be a second mover. Or where have you done this before? Are the two questions that often get asked on any type of pilot implementation. And this is, you don't need to go out into, I mean, I think from a tool perspective, what you got here is great, but I think it's great from like an adoption for any type of scenario. So any vendor coming in that wants to show like, this is the impact, I think it's a really great analysis tool without having to ask those questions of like, where have you done this before? And I want to be a second mover. You can start to take advantage of really good, interesting opportunities in this space without having, and it's de-risked. And I think that's the biggest thing, right? Everyone wants to be the second mover because it's de-risked.
That's exactly right.
And I think this is that perspective that says you don't have to go pilot with 5,000 units. You could pilot with 38 units, and this is what you might see.
Absolutely.
I had a phone call yesterday in one of the breaks with a general contractor for a project we're working on, and I told him where I was at. He goes, "Don't tell me you're doing that thing where you're going to, do the intercom thing that goes to the people's phone, are you?" And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about?" He's like, "Oh, we just got off this project and we spent 3 months and all this time. We ended up having to rip the whole damn thing out because none of it worked right." And I'm like, "Well, I don't know what that is, but the point is valid. Vet your technology, right?" So,
absolutely. It's that overpromising, man.
Yes.
I'm telling you. It's that PTSD we get, it's
absolutely
like,
right.
oh, I don't want to do
Unintended consequences.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think really just removing the marketing noise from the decision-making process, that has been the single biggest help for my customers as owner operators. But as we've recently pivoted to focus really in just empowering vendors, the reason for that is because you guys don't want to have to pay for these reports every single time if you're getting pitched. I figured it made more sense. Let's let the vendors pay for it. So ultimately now, if you go to many of the IoT vendors, they utilize this in their sales discussions because they can't articulate their value themselves. Really, because it's different per market. You're telling them, hey, you're going to save $38 per vacant unit per month. And they'd be like, where? Texas, New York, California, like where? So I think being able to be more micro in our analysis and be able to see that, yes, the energy efficiencies of, let's say, a thermostat in the state of Texas is going to be a bigger offset than, say, a thermostat in Seattle, but the labor cost in Seattle is going to be significantly more expensive than the labor cost in Texas. All of those things are articulated in all that micro market analysis. So it really does give a real community level look instead of hey, here's some generic numbers that we're going to do X, Y, Z, and we're saying we do this for every community across the nation. It just doesn't happen. So anyways, not to get off on my soapbox, but it was a pain point for me, as a decision maker. So I definitely have an opinion.
I like that. I thank you both for walking through that so we can kind of get a better visualization of utilizing technology to analyze technology, to use technology for revenue.
To justify technology.
Yes, exactly. And so the next thing I want to transition to is just where you see technology evolving in the future of revenue generation as a whole. That we haven't maybe talked about yet, where you think people should know that it's coming or be aware that they want to research it or look into it based on your inside perspective on utilizing technology for revenue. I'll start with you actually down on the end. Zach, go for it.
I'm really hoping you'd get to me last.
You know the ins and outs of what people are missing out on when it comes to utilities and driving revenue with your solution. What are you seeing?
I think the biggest shift in the perspective is really trying to tap into incentives that are going to be out there in the market. I think there's going to be a lot of things, specifically in utility space, that are going to drive down or look to drive down water costs, gas costs, electrification costs. And there's going to be a ton of vehicles that are coming up that are going to enable owner-operator win-wins with their residents. I think of a really interesting movement, at least in California, is installing solar panels on your roof. But one of the hard things that you get locked into with putting solar panels on your roof is how do you then get the best IRR on that? Because you're going to be locked into a net metering rate that the utility company is giving you when you do the sell back, because your common space isn't going to take up the entire usage of those solar panels on your roof. And so when I think about different ways to think through how to generate revenue, it's coming up with new solutions within the bounds of the constructs of things like an electricity account or an ISP, or things that are going to start becoming changing and shifting the landscape. I think that's going to be a really critical thing. And so, for instance, in the case of putting solar panels on your roof, thinking through ways to create a power purchasing agreement that allows you to then recoup the costs on the solar panels, that allows you to recoup the costs on a smart thermostat rolled out because your building is using less energy, because your building is creating more opportunities for revenue. So I think the biggest thing there is like staying within or like finding the things that you're doing today or want to do in the future, but then figuring out how to leverage and not necessarily yourselves, but manage, finding companies to manage those ways to give that revenue back.
Thanks. Taylor?
I think actually I'm going to just tack on the end right there, because I think the takeaway from that is finding good partners to help you through the process without you having to take on the burden to do it yourself. So all those revenue streams that exist, don't think you can do it yourself. Not that you couldn't, but the headache that you're going to associate, it's really not worth it. There are plenty of vendors out there, Public Grid being one of them, that can help you out getting all of these things in place, and it pretty much be a seamless experience at this point. But there are many larger management companies that have taken it upon themselves to create their own solutions. And I can tell you that in those internal conversations, they're struggling because they're like, I thought this would be easier. The reality is it's not easy. Like a lot of these problems that are being solved, they're not easy to solve. And if a vendor has dedicated years and years to solving one very specific pain point, and the resources put into solving that pain point, the chances of them being able to help you are much higher than if you're starting from scratch, and trying to figure it out yourself. So I think really that's just my encouragement, is just find good partners that have done these savings and enablements and revenue stream generations, and kind of start with one and go from there. But
I know Zach definitely would double down on what you just said based on all of the nuance that you've had to deal with to bring your solution to life, working with the utility companies behind the scenes. Do you have any quick stories on like what you've tried and put the time into solving in order to open up the opportunity of utilities for revenue?
Yeah, so my favorite is there are like 4,000 electric companies in the US. Yeah. And if you look at Texas alone, there's 290 different supply companies that all offer different rates. If you look across the nation, it's all different based on geography, based on what the local utility wants. And so I think one of there's simple things like just trying to interact with the utility to get signed up. Like my experience trying to sign up was such a difficult process there. And because it's all different per property, per staff, per different utility company, it's a really hard thing to get to scale. And if you're trying to do it internally, to your point, it's going to be really hard to manage that cost. But if you can focus on a company that's our job, right? That's our job, is to find the local incentives, to integrate with the local utility company, to make sure everything is away, and it should be seamless for you to implement without you having to take on the burden or risk yourself. And so I just think of the utilities landscape is really diverse across the entire geography of the US, but there is no opportunity to just create a single experience for that until you work with the right partners. And if you try to do it internally, you're gonna...
It's gonna be a struggle.
I tell people all the time, I'm like, you can take my company. I'm like, you want to do the utility management side of it? Like, go for it. Like, I'll tell you everything that we're doing, and happy to let you try to do it with utility companies.
Well, the customer service piece, that's the first question I'm asking anybody I'm talking to on this is when, Bobby or Susie has an issue with their thermostat, I cannot create an organization now to become, troubleshooters of thermostats. And so, what is that customer service experience look like for the tenant on the back end? That is going to be so critical, I think, in our own implementations.
Yeah, really good observation. Now that you've participated in sessions, met with vendors, you have your own strategy that you've brought into place, what are you the most excited about moving forward as far as revenue?
Well, obviously, we spoke about a lot of the IoT and hosted Wi-Fi. What I would tell you is, and it sounds like I'm maybe behind the ball on this, but some of those concepts of having interfaces for tenants where we can bring other third-party services, the house cleaning and other things, and make it a very seamless, easy way for tenants to schedule or to maybe buy these services is game-changing. I think. I frankly am surprised I'm not hearing more about that in the industry. But I think being able to use some of these dashboards and tools and in-home technology to be able to say, okay, I would like a cleaner or I would like this sort of service, be able to provide that for the tenant. It's very easy for them. And then, certainly we talk about revenue sharing or cost savings sharing. I think that is huge. I am worried. I will tell you, I'm worried about, my ring fell behind the bed and I lost it. It's because that cleaner stole it, right? Does that now become a point of contact for us if we're the ones connecting, those services together via technology? I think the answer is going to be yes, right? So we have to be able to manage that. But I think the opportunity is huge. So, it'll be growing pains and we'll figure out how to do it. But I'm really excited about that.
That's a good observation. And for those of you who didn't go to the Connect tour last night, this is one of the things they do. They are top of the game as far as revenue sharing with services coming in to the building, top of the game when it comes to creating a work environment that can be then rented out, those community spaces that matter. And Connect will actually be a part of the next panel, our lunch panel, because they're going to come in and kind of talk about their strategy is very focused and effective with Gen Z and those millennials and those younger demographics that they want the on-demand services. They want to be able to click a button and get those things, and they're taking advantage of it monetarily. So
absolutely. I was shocked by it. I was like, I think every person I saw walking out of the garage into the elevator, I'm like, how are they even affording this place? It is all young demographics there, and you can tell it's a really cool place.
Yeah, they have nailed down their demographics, and they are doing a really good job with partnering that with revenue. So that actually will come in the next session. I do want to take a few moments though and just open it up for questions. If anyone has any questions for any of the panelists as far as the solutions they provide, as far as what they've brought up. Yes.
Taylor, I'm curious.
I'm going to repeat the question just so everyone can hear it.
Yeah.
He's looking for where the background data comes from for Taylor's tool to be able to run the numbers and bring forward the reports.
That's a great question. So we are partnered with 3 organizations, but we have many data sources. So we work with Dwellsy IQ. They're directly integrated with 14 million units live via API from owner-operators. So this is non-human errored data, right? We know exactly when units are hitting the market, exactly when they are being leased, because as soon as someone is moved out, it is delisted on Dwellsy IQ. They're the only platform on the face of the planet right now that has that accurate data. So we have a partnership in place with them, hellodata.ai as well. What they provide us with is an ability to do micro market analysis via AI-driven comparables. So we can essentially go into a micro market, and instead of just saying, like previously when I was at Alliance, we did market analysis based on zip code. We couldn't get granular. So what Hello Data allows us to do is it'll go into a zip code, it'll look at all the communities in the zip code, and it will tell you which ones are alike, which ones are least alike. And it does that through scraping pictures. It does that through amenities. It does that through when it was last renovated, when it was built. There are 16 different things that it's looking at. So we're looking at individual, micro market analysis via Hello Data. And then essentially our government and NMHC integrations as well allow us to see significant benchmarking data. Our energy source integration data tells us, of course, what's the price of energy. Market data and labor data, U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics shows us what the cost of certain labor is. And then, of course, last but not least is the implementation data that we get from our vendor partners, which we now, and this is not even an accurate representation, but we have millions of units worth of implementation data from vendors all across the property technology space. So it's all of these data sources that work in tandem with our proprietary algorithm that enable us to be able to perform the analysis that we do.
Really good question. Any other questions? Yes.
So we talked about potentially using.
I'll also repeat the question again. So he's wondering if the PropTech reports can show reports that will be working for showing insurance risk, and helping also with getting debt.
Yeah, essentially, I was
Saving on insurance, right?
Right. So
Yeah.
Not focusing on insurance.
Yeah, so focus on reducing premiums and deductibles on insurance. Taylor.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just zoom in on this one right here. So we actually are integrated with live insurance and not just catastrophic, but just generic insurance data as well. So like we're very familiarized with things like leaks, right? And specifically categorizing those leaks. We know the difference between, natural disaster flood events. We know the difference between a water heater, kitchen sink, or bathroom flood event. And of course, we can see what's the percentage of units that are submitting claims, what are those claims costing on average, and then of course, based on the build type, class type, all those things. So yes, to answer your question, we absolutely do that. And it is actually figured into the efficiency calculations today, but we can separate those out if it was something specifically you wanted more information.
I think you're thinking like a specific report, a one-pager that is literally
Just on insurance.
And I think that's a fantastic idea, because you're right. The insurance companies, they will talk the game as far as savings, but when rubber hits the road, they don't know how to quantify it just as much as we do, and they're not offering it, right?
Absolutely.
Excellent thought.
Yeah.
Absolutely. These are some of the things. Now, we didn't put specifically that it was a reduction in your actual deductible or in your premiums, but when we look at flood damage reduction, we look at mold damage reduction, we're actually looking at what your premiums are, what the offset is, and what you would expect to save. So that is being figured in there for sure.
Well, you're probably aware of this, but I can tell you the way the insurance industry has gone, we are more or less viewing anything outside of catastrophic issues on our buildings to be self-insured, right? So you have a leak or something that happens, it messes up 2 or 3 units, that's coming directly out of, your company's accounts. You're not making claims on these things. The industry has just changed the way that they do things to the point where you are more or less self-insuring your buildings now outside of catastrophic loss. So,
So it's really good.
Having that data certainly helps justify.
Absolutely. But great question. Great question.
Okay, we're at time, and I'm on a mission to have every session end on time this event. So can I get a round of applause for all of their insight on the industry? Thank you.